Welcome to the Elokus podcast. We are now studying the discourse Besha'ah Shehikdimu 5672. This is class number 10 in the first discourse. We are holding in chapter 2 in Perek Beis. And this class and this entire first discourse was dedicated L'Schus Refuah Sheleimo for Avraham Ben Parvin. May he have a complete refuah, complete healing amongst all the ill of Israel, and all the big blessings for the entire family. Okay, so the theme that we're learning in the second chapter over here is we're discussing the concept of Or Pnimi. Or Pnimi means powers that invest themselves in vessels, because we're trying to explain the concept of Keser, which is crown, which is an energy that is encompassing and not settled in a vessel. So in order to understand the contrast, he's going to explain, and he's explaining the powers that are vested in vessels. And for example, he talks about the power of the intelligence, the power of vision, the power of hearing, and the power of power of tnua, the power of movement, the artistic powers that are craftsmanship and the like, where each one registers in a different part of the body. There's a particular limb and organ of the body in which this function takes place. Although these are all powers of the soul, but it matches up with a particular keli, with a vessel, and it becomes internalized in the vessel. In the last class, in class number 9, we were talking, he questioned it, he seems to challenge that. Sometimes the intelligence gets to the feet as well, to the legs or to the hands. In writing, as he discussed, or in dancing, there is intelligent movements and the like. So that he explained 2 points, and that's what we're holding now. What are the 2 points? Point number 1, even then, it's not that the intelligence directly goes into the hand, into the fingers, or the intelligence goes into the feet. What happens is that the koichos are mislabish one and the other. The powers become enclosed one in the other. It means that the intelligence is able to enclose itself in the power of movement, not in the physical hand. Physical hand is never a keli, or the physical feet is not a keli, is never a vessel directly for intelligence. It would never be able to communicate with the cells of the hands or the feet. What happens is that because the various different spiritual powers, the spiritual powers, the kochos hanefesh, are able to vest themselves one in the other. So in the case where you're having you're writing, you're training your body to do some kind of a more sophisticated type of a movement, and although that begins in the head, however, what's going on is that the koach of seichel is enclosing itself in the koach of tnua, and the power of movement. That's number 1. Point number 2, and this is the point that we were holding in the middle, is that and even then, it's not the essence of the koach. The substance of the power always remains in its particular vessel. It's only a external ray and influence from the higher power that can vest itself in a lower power, but not the essence of it. So he begins and he speaks about it regarding the intelligence, that pure and deep intellectual activity can only happen in the mind. That sometimes the intelligence flows into the heart, flows into the emotions, that's only an external element. It's a ray, it's an outside, it's the nether part of the intelligence goes into the emotions, but not the inner part of the intelligence. That's what we were learning. So let's read it again right over here. Shaharei, for behold, middle of Perek Beis, Shaharei, because even the power of the intelligence that encloses itself in the emotions, which are the closest to each other. Earlier, we're talking about the intelligence going down into the power into the motor element of the person, which is far more physical than the emotions. It's a much lower power. But even when it comes to the emotions, which are more elevated and closer to the intelligence, it's not the essence and the substance of the intelligence, the atzmos haseichel, because the essence of the intelligence, the essence of the intelligence is to conceive, to understand, to appreciate, to apprehend very, very deep intellectual ideas, v'nailim, and exalted ideas, she'enim shaychen lemidos, which are objective and not, it doesn't relate to emotions that are subjective. See, the core difference between intellect and emotions is that intellect is to know, is to conceive and to know truths for their own sake, what they are, unrelated to how that relates to me. Emotions are all about how it impacts me, how I, or the self, how we are impacted by whatever it is that the emotion stands for. She'enam, just give me 1 minute here. She'enam shaichem, that they're not rolling over here, the atzmas sasechia she'enam shaichem lemidas klal, that are not related to emotions. The emotion experience of a person is a secondary experience. The inner realm of the mind is pure intelligence for the sake of intelligence. Now, obviously, God created our intelligence to influence the emotions. And that's how we can actually guide our emotions, or else our emotion would be a horrific wreck. If we allow the emotions just to be in their inborn natural state, where they gravitate to whatever feels good, whatever superficially excites them without the guidance of the mind, obviously, then we would be a very misguided people, and our energies would lead us to literally live a very, very inappropriate life. So the emotions need to be educated. And obviously, the education of the emotions will come through the intelligence. However, although that's a function of the intelligence, it's the backside of the intelligence. There is a higher function of the intelligence in order for a person to know truths for the sake of knowing it, not in order how that knowledge will affect their behaviors or their man or their. True, the sages tell us that wisdom is not the main thing, only action. That's in the general purpose of a human being. But if we're looking at intelligence, just examining intelligence and its essence, its innate truth of intelligence, is just to observe and know and conceive reality, what's true. And sometimes certain truths are so abstract and so far and so deep that they don't have much to say about us. It's not about us. It's not about how we feel regarding them. They just are for what they are. They is for what it is. And that's the primary power of intelligence, is to know things in their purest, highest, deepest state. Ubachol inyan, and in every inyan, and even in, so two things. Number one, the general intelligence is meant to conceive ideas and not to excite us with whatever that knowledge calls for. It's to know and to know lofty things. And the second thing is, within whichever subject it does conceive, even let's say sometimes when we use our mind to conceive lower realities, truths that are closer to us, closer to our everyday life. And because of that, these truths and these ideas could influence us and should influence to improve and to direct, to our emotions should become refined. But even then, the core of the seichel, of the intellect itself, is to know this subject in its very essence, not its ramifications. So what that means is as follows: every idea has the idea as the idea exists on its own, and then there are the ramifications. If this is so then how should my behavior be? Right? How should I? For example, let's take a holy idea. Okay, we can understand what is a mitzvah. So before Hasidus came along, we always thought a mitzvah is a good deed. Right? It's a good deed. It's something nice. It's good. It's good for the human. It's good for us. It helps us improve our ways, so forth and so forth. Then we learn Hasidus and we find out the mitzvah is the will of God. and it's actually one of the God's limbs. Hashem expresses himself, his deepest self. God himself flows in his mitzvahs. So when we learn that in Chassidus, that's a very, very, very powerful idea onto its own, the appreciation of what a mitzvah is in its essence. Now, the ramifications of that is, once I know that a mitzvah is so awesome, so incredibly great, now I can also appreciate and understand I should want to do a mitzvah. I should be pursuing mitzvahs. We should be pursuing mitzvahs. We should be doing mitzvahs as much as we can. We should make sure there shouldn't be a day, God forbid, that goes by without us doing a mitzvah. These are all ramifications. So the ramifications of it are the external part of the intellect. That's already the aspect of this, of the idea that relates to the emotions. But then there is the pneumius of the idea, understanding this very notion that a mitzvah is God's very, very essential will. To understand that in the deepest form, that's the function of the intelligence. As v'chol in and in every inyan, be'etzem u'muhuso inyan, to know it in its essence, to know it in its very, very inner core. K'moishu hu l'mayla, as it is still higher, migeder midos, from it to be an inspiration for the emotions, for it to be a drive of the emotions. Now, the nether part, the mochen, the part of the intelligence that does have a relationship to emotions, that's only the external element of the moach. It's the external element of the intelligence. That's the mochen that has a relationship to the emotion. That's the intelligence that has a relationship to the emotions. Now, there's two levels over here. There is, well, let's say three levels. There is pure intelligence for the sake of intelligence. That's the essence of the mochen. Then there is the external part of emotions. Those are levels of intellectual pursuit that could have an influence on our emotions, and the purpose of them are so that they can teach and influence our emotions. So it's a lower element of the intelligence, so that it can flow. It can influence our emotions. And then there's a third level. There is some of the perception that the mind perceives of the intellectual idea that actually enters into the emotion and becomes part of the emotion. That means in the feeling itself, there is the reason that we're feeling that way, and that reason is sensed within the emotion. So it's the brain of the emotion. It's the mind of the emotion. Now that is even less. So there is the brains, the mind that inspires the emotion, but it's still, you can see, you can feel that it's intelligence. It's not emotion. It's inspiring the emotion. And then there is something of the intelligence itself that enters into and serves as a battery, as the power that goes inside the emotion and continuously justifies the emotion, so to speak, or inspires the emotion from within. So that's even less. That's even more external. So these are the three stages. So let me just put this into practice a little bit. It says when we meditate in prayer, that when and we want to, and the point of prayer is to get ourselves to open up our hearts to God, to get our love and fear of God. It says we should try not to meditate on the deepest, most abstract aspects of Hasidic teaching, of godliness. And although it's great to learn and study and to know these things, you should do that while you're studying and while you're learning, but not while you're praying. Don't meditate on it. And it says the reason for that is because these ideas are so abstract, they're so high, they're so far from us that the emotions will not respond to them. Because they're so distant, they're so removed. They're such distant truths and so sublime that our emotions, the emotion has a little bit of ego. Emotion is a little bit of the self. The emotion involves or considers the self. The I cannot get excited about it. It's too lofty. It's too deep. It's too great. That's why a major part of the prayer, especially the part before the Shema, is speaking about the angels, how excited they are about God. And the question over here is, why are we so busy with how excited the angels are about God? Why don't we just think about how God is so great? Because he is great, not because he has such a great fan club. Right? That's what we're really saying. We're saying that he's so great. He has such a great fan club. He has billions of followers on Hashem's TikTok. He's got millions of followers. And therefore we should get excited about it. That's external. That's superficial. So why are we spending so much time about how the angels are excited about God? Think about how awesome God is. And the answer is because just like we see within our physical lives, when we see a lot of people excited about something and about somebody, it draws our attention, and we say that person must be, and that must be good. And we see many, many people who judge everything in life by how many followers they are, and that's what the deciding factor is, if it's good or not. And that is so because the animal soul, the lower part of our being, is very impressionable about what society says, what others think. And so on davening, we are told not to meditate on the most abstract, distant elements, because they're too far from our reality and they won't excite our emotions. So here we have an example of mochen, of intelligence that is for the purely sake of the intelligence. And then there are mochen, certain understandings that are more relatable to our emotions. So what he's saying over here in the Maamor is that the main purpose of, the main essence of intelligence is the higher intelligence. And that only happens in the brain. That doesn't even go in. That doesn't even go in. That's not, that doesn't even flow into the emotion at all. That remains in the realms of intelligence. Because an Or Pnimi, an internal light, this is the theme of what we're learning over here, an Or Pnimi has a particular keli, has one place in where it registers, and that's in the mind. And although you do find that there is a carrying over where the moichin go into the midos, that's the external part, the lower part of the a secondary, we might call it a secondary function of the emotions, that it's, of the intelligence, that it's able to inspire and direct the emotions. Now, within that itself, there is a higher level where the energy is higher, the intellectual energy that is not yet ready to enter into the emotions because they're too intense or too powerful, too high, too lofty. Even the lower element of our intelligence that could inspire emotions doesn't mean that it can become the intellect of the emotion. It becomes a guide to the emotion, but it's still intelligence. Then there's a third level where some of the intelligence goes into the emotion and becomes part of the emotion. It's the mind, it's the brains of the emotion. It's the Chabad of the midos. It's not Chabad, the intellect influencing the emotions. It's the Chabad of the emotions themselves. As he says over here, and the mochen that have a connection to the midos in general, is only the external element of the mochen. And specifically the mochen that goes into the midos, which generally is not, doesn't contain the richness of that which you've perceived, just a summary. This is a discussion that is discussed a lot in Chassidus. It says that whenever we perceive and understand something, after we perceive, the process of how our intelligence excites our emotions are as follows. That after you perceive a certain idea and you analyze it from so many different angles and from different parts, and you conceive it from and the details of it and so and the richness of it, and you get all the information, the emotions will not get excited unless you summarize and you come to a conclusion. And what's your conclusion? Your conclusion is that this phenomenon, whatever it is a good thing. And only when you summarize and you come to that conclusion, that your mind is telling you that it's good, it's worthy, it's special, it's wonderful. And what's the conclusion? Because it's good, now the emotion could respond, and the emotion can get excited about it because I want something that's good for me. The emotions are concerned only with the self. So if this is good for me, I want it. So the way it works is like this. The mind summarizes, this is good. Then the mind takes it even a step lower. It says, this is not just good, but it's good for me. And then the emotions are able to get excited about it. That's called the bechain. Bechain is, so summarize it, give me a quick summary. The emotions are not interested in the complicated nuances of the idea. The emotions need a quick summary. It's not the essence and the substance of the intelligence, as stated elsewhere. So all of this is just bringing out one point, and that is that the intellect, the pure intellect, remains only in the mochen. It remains only in the head. The kolsh can hasech. That's even when the intellect relates to emotion. The kolsh can hasech, And how much more so when the intellect goes down to inform and to intellectualize the motorization of a person, to go down into the power of movement that is in the hands and in the feet, and the power of walking, which to make it more intelligent movements, which, as we spoke earlier, the art of dancing. No one will say that this is the real substance of a person's intelligence. Yes, it's one of the features of the intelligence, one of the secondary features, or thirdary, or fourthary, I don't know, whatever you'll call it, a very, very, very outer, external part of the intelligence that it can do that. It's as if someone buying a major, you're purchasing a computer with a powerful processor, and included in it is a calculator that you could do basic, arithmetic and do various different basic math. So obviously it's part of the computer, but no one is going to say that you spent, $1,200 or $1,500 for this brand new desktop and this computer or this fancy laptop in order that you should use a calculator. The calculator you can buy for $5 or $10. I don't know how much you can buy in Staples, a little calculator. You can use it for that. You don't need this computer. So the same is also over here. The mind has its extensions that go into the lower powers, but that's not what a mind is really all about. A mind has the ability to understand on the deepest levels of things. However, what is taking place in the brain, in the head, over there, the intelligence that is the super intelligence, the real strong and powerful forces of the intelligence, where does it take place in the body? It becomes enclosed. It actually takes hold in the gray matter that's in the head of the moach, mamish, and becomes enclosed in it. Because when we're conceiving things, when we're studying, let's say Albert Einstein is trying to crack open the idea of relativity. Imagine how much he sweated in his brain until he was able to conceive that idea. Deeper and deeper and deeper, thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking and pondering and pondering. Where did it take place? It took place in his head, inside his skull, in that place. It wasn't in the abstract soul. It was happening in his physical. It was the physical brain activity that was enabling him to conceive that idea. Lahaskal kol dvar seichel v'chachma, to conceive every dvar seichel, every intelligent idea and any concept and wisdom has to take place in the physical brain, which because it's a keli, and that's the concept of an or pnimi, where the light and the energy, the power of the soul vests itself in a vessel. And that is because and that's because when God created the body, God created a special vessel, a special facility that can facilitate intelligence. And that's why you take a look. The way the brain looks, it looks very different than everything else. And its chemistry and its anatomy, the anatomy of the way the brain, God made the brain cells, he crafted them and made them different than any other part of the body. It's very, very refined type of cells. And that's why the slightest injury, God forbid, in the brain is so severe, because the brain God protects it with a heavy skull, with a heavy bone, because it's so sensitive, because it's a very, very fine material that Hashem created particularly to serve as a receiver, a receptor of the power of the mind, the koach haseichel. Mislabish becomes enclosed, umizgala boy, and reveals itself in it, umizachid boy, and it unifies itself with the brain. And this is also the reason. Now he concludes the idea how the powers of the soul, the powers, what we call the or pnimium, each one has a particular vessel to go inside. The intelligence is in the brain, and the power of vision is in the eye, and so forth. Now he's going to derive. So what happens as a result of that? What happens as a result of that, he's going to bring this into the next thought, which is very geschmack, very special. And what he says is like this: they will rub off on each other, because the vessel is a true vessel. The vessel and the soul, let's call it the soul and the vessel, the energy and the vessel, they become so unified, and for that reason, they each one rubs off on the other. which means they get married to each other and they become one. So in as much as the main power is the energy and the vessel is only a recipient, it enables the experiences to be felt in the body. But what would happen is, because they become so interlocked, interwoven, and assimilated one into the other, for that reason, the vessel will affect the energy as well. What does that mean? What the limbs have an impact and an effect on the powers as well. That they make that the spiritual power of the soul becomes more materialized. According to the substance of the limbs. What does that mean? Our souls, before they come into a body, have all these powers. So the neshama, a bodiless soul in heaven, has an intelligence. But its intelligence is purely spiritual. It's purely, and it could conceive concepts and ideas that are beyond time and space. When we come into a physical body, we have an intelligence, and it's the same soul. But now, the way our intelligence works is, it's physical. Everything is physical. Every perception that we have is through the lens of the physical. As he's going to say later, that even when we conceive spiritual ideas, like the ideas of godliness, which are spiritual, we bring analogies from the physical world. Chassidus is always bringing examples from our flesh, from our human physical experiences, because our minds cannot think in the purest abstract form like it thought when it was not in a body. It needs to experience everything in a tangible physical manner. And that's because the power of the soul merged and became part of a physical flesh. And the physical flesh imparts its physicality onto the power. That the power has now become influenced with the physical features of the physical body. Just like the intelligence will conceive physical haskalas, physical concepts. Now, the power of sight that the soul has when the neshama is in heaven, it sees spirituality. It can see angels. It can see divinity, whatever the soul can see. But when that very same power registers in a physical eye, we can see physical things. We see physical phenomenon. We don't see spiritual things. We see something physical, not something spiritual. This is not as a result of the powers on their own. Because the intelligence of the soul, mitzad atzmai, on its own, is designated, will only experience spiritual phenomenon, spiritual ideas. The English shaykh is klal, and it cannot, a soul in heaven cannot perceive la skala gashmias, a physical concept of this world. But when it's fed, when the power of its intelligence is fed through a physical brain in the substance of the gray matter of the head, we kind of can say it decreases it and forces, so to speak, the intelligence to perceive everything through physical perception. We will leave over here, Be'ezus Hashem, and continue in tomorrow this fascinating idea.